today we're going to answer, what does the Bible say about GLP-1s? So just so you guys know, my plan for this class is to do maybe about a 30-minute presentation for you. And then I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to just open it up and you guys can just you can ask some questions. So that's where we're going. Here's what we're going to learn today. So what are GLP-1s? What are the options that are available? What are the benefits? What are the cautions? We're going to talk a little bit in general about lifestyle-related medications. And also, finally, we're going to answer the question, what does the Bible say about that? So I always like to teach people what they are because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so most of our GLP-1s are just the GLP-1, which is an incretin hormone, stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. There are a couple you'll see here in a minute that also include a second hormone, which is GIP, which stands for glucose-dependent insulin-tropic polypeptide. So say that 5 times fast. The ones that have both of them tend to have better weight loss results, but also they have more side effects. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And so what do? Well, they tend to kind of quiet hunger. They slow down the stomach emptying, and then they signal an insulin response to carbohydrates. So they really do a wide variety of things. This is better. Okay, so this is just a good kind of visual of what these GLP-1s are doing. So in the brain, they really help with increasing satiety and decreasing appetite. In the stomach, they slow it down and they reduce the emptying of the stomach so that you're going to feel full a little bit longer. In the pancreas, they increase insulin response and they decrease glucagon. And so this is the main reason that these are really helpful with helping to control blood sugars in maybe pre-diabetes or also in diabetes. So here's all the options. So I mentioned the very first option was Byetta, which is exenatide, and that was actually approved in 2005. And so again, these drugs have been around a really long time. Byetta was it was the first one. It was really quite exciting at the time because there wasn't anything on the market yet that really did what this drug does. And so in terms of managing blood sugars, it was really exciting. The downside is a lot of people were kind of against it because it required 2 daily injections. So the newer options, it's once a week, and so that doesn't seem so overwhelming. It was a hard sell for patients sometimes because why wouldn't they just do insulin at that point? They're doing 2 injections. So that was back in 2005, and then in 2014, a couple other options became available. All of these, by the way, are still available. They're a little different form. They're a little different formulation. By the way, the doctor that invented Byetta, when I got to meet him, that one of those first days in my role as diabetes educator, I was in charge of the whole program. I got to sit down with him and he told me how he discovered it. And it actually came from lizard venom. So I bet you didn't know that either. So the Gila monster venom was actually how the drug Byetta was developed. And then, of course, now we have all of these other options available as well. So the semaglutide is probably the one that you guys have heard of most. That would be the Ozempic and the Wegovy. And I actually just put one of the oral medications that's available now, but there's a couple of other ones now. But the Rybelsus, that one just was approved like just a couple months ago. I think it was in April. So that's one of our newest options. And really what they were working on with that one was that these are all peptides. They're hormones, so they're strings of protein. So if you take them orally, they just get digested. And so they were working on a delivery mechanism for these medications so that the stomach wouldn't just digest the medication and they finally figured it out. And so that's why we have these oral medications now. The last thing to note on this slide is the tirzepatide. That's the Mounjaro and the Zepbound. These are the options that contain both of those hormones that I was mentioning in the previous slide. So these are the ones that generally have the best effects for weight loss, or maybe the most pronounced effects for weight loss. But again, they also have the most side effects. Okay, so the benefits that we see from these GLP-1s. So of course, we see an improvement in blood sugars. That's the main one. That's why they were developed. But then as we were using them in diabetes, we saw a surprising side effect of weight loss. And so that's actually how they became to be approved for weight loss only, was because it was side effect. And fun fact, that actually happens with a lot of our drugs. It also has potential to reduce cardiovascular risk, and it's being studied currently for the treatment of NASH, which is non-alcoholic steatohepatosis, which is it's basically liver disease, and also Alzheimer's. The cautions. So you see there is a list of cautions. I think this is one of the maybe myths to kind of squash today, is that there are side effects and there are cautions with these medications. So a lot of people experience nausea or other gastrointestinal discomfort. There is quite a risk of pancreatitis. And that actually is not necessarily due to the medication itself, but it's a side effect of rapid weight loss. So that I've seen that happen so many times in patients. There is a low blood sugar risk. So if you are prone to low blood sugars, this probably isn't a good choice. There's also a risk of thyroid tumors. They're trying to do some more longer term studies on these. And really what they're finding is that after it's discontinued, the thoughts about food, or the food noise, as we call it, are worse. And so therefore, it really requires lifelong treatments to see the benefits, the health benefits that we saw in the previous slide. We also see muscle loss and potentially lower metabolism. And again, those happen usually with a rapid weight loss. So it's not necessarily the drug, but it's because the drug is causing the rapid weight loss. We really have to be careful that we're not losing muscle, that we're not messing up our metabolism, and that we're being careful with how we're using it. So of course I had to put this slide in as a dietitian. I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, maybe I can just do the GLP-1 and then I'll be, fixed, or it's a miracle or whatever. And really there's a huge role that dietitians play in helping people use these wisely. So dietitians can give recommendations to help reduce side effects. They can obviously help with managing those blood sugars. They do a lot of counseling to help with continued changes. They can improve overall nutrition, and that actually will help maintain muscles and maintain metabolism. So there's a lot of ways that dietitians can help. So this is not just a, kind of sales pitch, come see me, but just a good dietitian in general really has a big role in helping people manage their weight, or also their blood sugars, with the help of these medications. Okay, so this is where we get into the good stuff. So I just wanted to say a word about lifestyle-related medications in general. So really what we're talking about here is these are conditions or diseases that are affected by our lifestyle choices in some way, okay? So we're talking about diabetes, we're talking about weight management, we're talking about cholesterol, we're talking about blood pressure. So all of these fall into this category of what we would call lifestyle-related conditions. And so we obviously have medications to help with some of these lifestyle-related conditions. And so I just want to point out that there are some risk factors for these lifestyle conditions that are really not in our control. These are what we call unmodifiable risk factors. So this includes our genes. We can't choose who our parents are, right? Other health issues can potentially cause some of these lifestyle related conditions. And then also age. As we get older, our bodies just don't work the way that they used to, right? And so we can't obviously prevent aging. That's just something that happens. So where we do have some control is these are called modifiable risk factors, and this is our daily activity and our food choices, okay? So just a quick story before we move on to the next slide. I had I think she was 74-year-old woman who was just diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. She had a really strong family history of type 2 diabetes. And she walks into my office and she sits down and she crosses her arms and she says, Jen, I do not know what happened. I did everything right my whole life. She exercised, she made healthy food choices 95% of the time. She just could not understand how in the world she got type 2 diabetes. And so we just sat down and we had a conversation about how sometimes our genes just have a really important effect on what is happening in our body. And then the fact that now she's 74, and actually with that strong family history, the fact that she was able to delay it till 74, I told her that was really amazing. So it was nothing she did wrong. She just had a couple of those unmodifiable risk factors that contributed to her being diagnosed with diabetes. And so sometimes it's really a hit to our pride when something happens like this, because we really thought that we did everything we could, and then our body just still isn't working right. So there are ways that we can reduce risk of these lifestyle related conditions. And the first one on the list, I think, is actually one of the most important: managing stress. And we always think about what we should be eating, how much we should be eating, activity, but stress management is really just as important, if not more important, than eating and activity levels. Of course, eating a healthy, balanced diet. So this is the piece where I would love to do a whole class on this, and maybe I will, by the way. I'm kind of hoping to do a few more of these online classes just as a free resource for you guys. So eating enough, but not too much carbohydrates, and then keeping those balanced with fats and proteins. Consistency is really important. So not skipping meals. And then this is the one that always gets people. The goal for fruits and vegetables is 5 to 9 cups a day. Woo! So I know that's a lot. And it's something you want to kind of work towards. Okay. And then obviously moving regularly, and that really needs to include both strength and cardiovascular training. And one of the things that I've really been talking to a lot of my clients about recently is that in America, we do really have such a sedentary lifestyle that sometimes we think, okay, if we go to the gym in the morning, then we can just relax the rest of the day. We don't have to do anything. And it's actually, we need to think about moving regularly all day long. So the strength and the cardiovascular recommendations are important, but we also want to try to avoid sitting for too long of periods of time. And then getting enough sleep. So that one's super important too. I was actually just doing a continuing education yesterday on the correlation with sleep apnea and diabetes, and there's a huge correlation there. And so we really want to make sure that we're getting sleep, managing our stress, eating a healthy diet, and moving regularly. But sometimes we can do all the right things and our bodies still don't work right. So that relates to the story of my sweet 74-year-old client that I saw a few weeks ago. And so what do we do when that's the case? And this is where we can get into a little bit about what the Bible says about that. So we know a couple of principles from the Bible. Number one, we are called to take care of our bodies for the Lord. So this is in 1 Corinthians 6, 19 through 20. I want to encourage you guys to write down these passages and maybe after we're done today, go and look at those. And so having in mind a goal of taking care of our bodies, and what does that look like? And that's probably going to look a little bit different for each of us. For some of us, that might mean losing some weight. For some of us, that might mean gaining some weight. For some of us, it might mean we haven't really thought about that at all because we are just naturally able to maintain a healthy weight. So asking, what might it take, or what might it look like to take care of my body for the Lord, not for myself? We are also called to have a good attitude about it. So this is actually something I'm constantly working on. Are we having a good attitude about making the healthier choice? Are we having a good attitude about taking a little bit of time to create a meal plan? There's really a lot of application there. So Galatians 5, of course, is the famous fruit of the Spirit passage. And so, of course, joy and peace and patience and self-control and gentleness and kindness are all in there. And so we want to make sure that we're cultivating those good attitudes about all of it. And then the passage in Colossians 3 really has a lot to say about attitudes also. And so that's a wonderful passage. It goes from putting off our old self before we knew Christ, and then what do we put on instead? And so again, it's all about our attitudes about it. We also know that we are called to say no to our fleshly desires. And that is found in Romans 8, verses 5 to 11. And lastly, we are called to do everything for the glory of God. And that's 1 Corinthians 10:31. And so that includes how we take care of our bodies. So there's just some, I just did a few scripture passages. It's funny when you start looking at what does the Bible say about our bodies and how we take care of our bodies. There are actually a lot of concepts really all through the Bible that give us some clues to that. These are just kind of some of the main ones that I use with a lot of my clients and in my Food and Faith program too. So I thought it might be helpful to give you guys some practical questions when you're thinking about what does the Bible say about taking this GLP-1 medication. So number one, am I doing all that I can to take care of my body? That's a great question. Are my motivations in taking care of my body for the Lord? This can sometimes be a tricky one to sort out because I think a lot of times underneath us saying maybe that we want to take care of our body for the Lord, we have some selfish motivations in there. So we really want to watch out for that. Have I done all in my power to try to manage this condition? Or maybe have I been a little bit prone to laziness? Have I asked the Lord to reveal any sin patterns? And am I fighting these sin patterns and making progress? So those are some good questions to ask to get you kind of started in thinking about this. And then I thought a lot of times people ask, well, what are some common sin patterns? So obviously, I think the most common one that we see and that is called out in the Bible is overeating. But I want to say the opposite is true also. If we're depriving our bodies of nutrition or we're intentionally skipping meals, that's not good either. So again, we want to have this balance here, which is part of what makes it so tricky. We can't just stop eating food if food is a problem, right? So we have to find that balance where we're not overeating, but we're eating enough. And so knowing what that balance is sometimes a little bit tricky. Another example might be if you're just constantly in a state of high stress, that could indicate that you're not trusting in the Lord. Maybe you're prone to wasting time rather than making a simple meal plan or doing some exercise. And then lastly, we're focusing on the way we look or what the weight is on the scale. So those can all be some common sin patterns. The Bible's really, really clear that God does not care what we look like. That's the world telling us that, right? And so we really want to be careful that we're not conforming to the world in that way and that we're thinking about what God says. The last thing I want to say about this is there is a quite a spectrum of how we're thinking about nutrition and health. So on one end, we've got people who are really prone to apathy about it. They just don't care. They take the easy way out. They just don't understand why it's important. This is apathy. On the other end, we have preoccupation. This might be where maybe we're tracking everything we eat. Maybe we never eat anything we call bad. We're those thoughts about food and what we're going to eat next, they're taking up a little too much mental real estate. Okay. And so obviously either end of that spectrum is going to get us into trouble in some ways. And so again, we really want to identify which of those ends are we prone to being in. And then we want to fight it. So we want to try to find that balance and find a way where we're taking care of our body for the glory of God, not for ourselves. So if you answered yes to, am I doing everything I can to take care of my body? Are my motivations for the Lord? Have I done everything to manage this condition? Have I asked the Lord about any sin patterns? And am I fighting these? Then maybe using a GLP-1 could be a good tool. So again, sometimes we can do all the right things and our bodies still don't work right. And when that happens, we can really thank God that we have some medications to help us manage these conditions. And so I put another verse in here just because I'm also reading a book on aging right now, and it's just been so helpful. Our outer selves are wasting away and our inner selves are being renewed day by day. So we just want to remember that we can't fight everything that's happening to our bodies as they age. And so that being said, thank the Lord for some of these medications, but we really want to be careful that we're not using these medications to mask or exacerbate sin patterns. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. So an example of a way that maybe we would mask a sin pattern is if we say something like, if I'm on this medication, I can eat whatever I want and I don't have to worry about taking care of my body. That would be masking a sin pattern. We can correct it and say something like, if I'm on this medication, I recognize that it's my responsibility in taking care of my body for the Lord. Another example would be to exacerbate. So being thin is the most important thing to me. If I start on this medication, I can be thin. So that would be where we're kind of idolizing thinness. And so that would be an example of a wrong reason to take one of these GLP-1 medications. A corrected thought would be something like, being thin really isn't important to God. He's concerned that I'm taking care of my body to the best of my ability. So really, to sum it up, GLP-1s can be a helpful tool in managing diabetes and weight if we make sure that we're not using them to mask or exacerbate a sin pattern. And we really want to be aware that there are benefits, but there are also cautions. And we want to make sure that we have a conversation with our medical provider about whether it's a good fit or not. And so I wanted to share with you this definition of wellness. So as I'm teaching more about faith-based nutrition and taking care of our bodies, I find that people really just don't think about this in a biblical way. And so I came up with this definition of wellness, which is the pursuit of taking care of my body. And that means physically, spiritually, and emotionally, to the best of my ability and knowledge, with the understanding that God is sovereign. So there's a couple things I want to point out in here. Number one, it's a pursuit. So we're not just lazy about it. We're not just praying that whatever will go away. We're not avoiding going to the doctor to find out a blood work number. It's a pursuit. So we're trying to take care of our bodies. The second piece of this is to the best of our ability and knowledge. So just recognizing that we're limited, we don't know everything, we can't do everything all the time. And so just doing the best that we can. And then lastly, with the understanding that God is sovereign. So doing all we can, but then leaving the outcome up to God. So I'm just gonna, I think a lot of you already follow me on Instagram or are part of my free Facebook group. I'm gonna put this class up on YouTube. So I wanted you to have my YouTube information as well. And so really, when we think about GLP-1s, there's really not a right answer, right? So we wanna just be thinking clearly about, is this a tool that would be helpful to me? And am I doing everything that I can to manage my condition? And so I want us to kind of think a little bit differently about those. And I meant to say it at the beginning, but I do, before we get into the Q&A time, I want you guys to think about your own experience with a GLP-1. So you might not be taking one, but you might know somebody who is. You maybe have heard some things about them. And so I want you to just think about how that has shaped your opinion of it. And then I want you to think about, how does knowing a little bit more information about those GLP-1s change your perception of those medications? I hope that really what the class did for you today is it helped you think about them in a different way, and it helped you maybe take some responsibility for some of your habits, maybe good or bad. And maybe it helped you think about things in a more biblical light, which I think is always helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll open it up.